Good morning. Welcome to the first ever virtual celebration for Veterans Day here at Angelo State University. I'm Susan Williams. I'm the Director for Affiliated Military and Veteran Services, and this is the happiest day of the year for us over in our Vets Center with our veterans. We're going to begin today's event with a very meaningful military tradition, and so for those who have been in the military or around the military, this is one of my favorite things. It's probably one of yours, and that's the presentation of the colors. It's going to be done by the cadets from ASU's own ROTC Detachment 847, and after that we'll have the national anthem. So if you're able, at this time, would you rise for the presentation of the colors and then remain standing for the national anthem? Thank you. That was wonderful from the cadets. We appreciate that. So happy Veterans Day. There is a reason we often get asked why the 11th month, the 11th day, and the 11th hour. But for those who know a little bit about their history, they know that that was the day that was first known as Armistice Day. It was the day that a ceasefire was signed between the Allies and Germany in World War I. And then from there, it just kind of rolled. As other wars came on the scene, it became known as Veterans Day. So for those of us who work, again, over in the Vet Center, this is one of the happiest days of the year. And I have one of the best jobs in the world because I get to work with and serve our veterans on a daily basis. So that being said, you get to know people a lot when you work with them, right? We actually spend more time with them sometimes than we do our spouses. But if there's one thing that I can tell you about America's veterans, it's that those core values that they learn in boot camp, that later get reinforced in combat, things like integrity, honor, duty, courage, commitment, service before self, those kinds of things, that just becomes ingrained in a veteran. And so they just become some of the most dependable, reliable, giving, sacrificial people I've ever had the honor of being around. And today, here at ASU, we're going to extend some recognition to a lot of folks, but in particular to two different categories that you'll be seeing in a moment in terms of presentations. And these are folks who have really gone above and beyond the call of duty and sacrifice and that kind of thing, and in giving not only to the community, but especially here at Angelo State University. So that being said, at this time, let me introduce, to make the first presentation, Jamie Aiken, who is ASU's Vice President for Development and Alumni Relations.
Good morning, everyone, from all of us here at Angelo State. We are honored to dedicate this time to our heroes and our friends, our veterans of the Concho Valley. At Angelo State, we have the opportunity to impact lives of veterans and active duty service members every day through higher education. ASU's success in this is largely credited to our adaptive courses and award-winning military-friendly culture, our outstanding Vet Center, our amazing relationships with Goodfellow Air Force Base and other military and veterans organizations, and of course, each donor and supporter that have contributed to a Veterans Initiative at Angelo State. 2 years ago, at a Veterans Day celebration, Ginger Gilbert Ravella returned to ASU, where she met her late husband, Major Troy L. Gilbert. Ginger told a very inspiring story about Major Gilbert's bravery and sacrifice. And that day, a scholarship was established to benefit veterans and active duty military students at Angelo State. The scholarship continues to make an impact for our students and is one of the many ways we have changed lives through education with donor support. Today, we have the opportunity to announce yet another very special gift, this time honoring our veterans of the Vietnam War. With an anonymous donor, the San Angelo Area Foundation has once again made an impact on our community and our students by establishing the William and Don Griffiths Vietnam War Oral History Archive at Angelo State. We are especially grateful for Matt Lewis, a dedicated board of directors at the San Angelo Area Foundation, for continuing to be an advocate for donors in our area, for ASU, and for our service men and women. Later, we're going to hear from Dr. John Klingeman, Dean of Art and Humanities, about the project in more detail. But first, I want to introduce Matt Lewis, President and CEO of the San Angelo Area Foundation, who will tell us more about the namesake of the archive. Matt?
It is indeed an honor to be here representing the San Angelo Area Foundation, and today an anonymous donor who made this archive endowment fund available. But I would be remiss at first if I didn't say to Phil George how honored I am to be here with you today and for the service you have given to our country. But I'll say to the friendship that you gave to me and Charlotte over 20 years ago when we sat behind you in the pew at First Methodist Church, and there was this nice tall gentleman who just turned around and just adopted me and Charlotte as friends, and to this day we're still friends, and God bless you, Phil, and it's awesome for you to be honored today. But it's great that ASU allows the Area Foundation, and we are able to work together and encourage each other for this particular archive. This archive is named to honor two San Angelo brothers, William and Don Griffiths. Perhaps you've heard of Don Griffiths, who has been a longtime lawyer here in San Angelo for over 50 years practicing law. But perhaps you don't know the story about his brother. Maybe you do. But his story has been documented that Captain William Griffiths III was killed in action in Vietnam in 1970. His second daughter, Mitty, was born 18 hours apart from the time he died, and he never had the chance to meet his daughter, and daughter never had a chance to meet dad. But the Sally Griffiths, Bill's widow, still called San Angelo home. She grew up in Ozona. It's part of the San Angelo fabric of our community, and Mitty has grown up to become a correspondent with CBS out of New Orleans and did a wonderful documentary and has done a lot of work to tell the story about the families and what they've gone through, suffering the loss of a loved one during the Vietnam era. And we know the history of as the Vietnam veterans returned home, the challenges that they faced. So we honor the life of Captain Bill Griffiths and his family and all that they have done and tell the story. And I encourage you to read the story and learn more about Bill, but also to honor Don Griffiths, who also continued to serve in the military in Vietnam, not only as a JAG officer, but leading troops on the ground in Vietnam, returning home and having a successful law career, raising a wonderful family. And the Griffithses were unable to be here today. Obviously, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and for safety reasons, they couldn't travel to be here, but we've communicated with Sally and with Mitty and with the Griffiths family, and they've got the link, and so hopefully the internet is working good today across the United States, and they're watching today, and they're going to join me in celebrating Phil George later as well. But it's awesome that we have donors that love Angelo State University. It's awesome when they want to be known, and it's awesome when they ask to be anonymous, and we honor that. It's great that the history of Vietnam veterans has been recorded. Don has written a book called Eagle Days. I encourage you to read it if you haven't. He does a great job of telling his story. But then the purpose of this archive, Dean Klingeman's going to talk about it here in a minute and give a little bit more detail, but it's to make sure that those veterans of the Vietnam War that have not had a chance to tell their story will be recorded by students of ASU and funded by this endowment fund. I love the quote that Prissy Griffiths gave about Don when in 2008 Don received the Citizen of the Year Award in San Angelo. If we had more people like Don, the world would indeed be a better place. And that's the kind of history we want to make sure we remember. And to everyone at Angelo State that allowed us to be a part of this partnership in celebrating veterans, celebrating the life of Bill Griffiths, but also the life of Don Griffiths and the Griffiths family, we thank you for allowing this grant, this endowment to continue in perpetuity to make sure that the history of all Vietnam veterans is remembered.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Eusebio Klingeman, and I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities. And first, I want to say thank you so much to Ms. Jamie Aiken, Mr. Matt Lewis, for all the hard work that they've done on working with our anonymous donors to secure such an important fundings to carry out these important projects. And I also want to say, I would be remiss if I didn't say that Mr. Phil George, it is absolutely an honor to be in your presence, and thank you. You're a World War II veteran, Vietnam veteran, and thank you for your service. So when we talk about oral histories and the recovery of that information, it is so important to note that, that these are people who have an experience that they want to share with individuals. And while we know about so many times veterans who are just reluctant to talk about what they experienced, that it's important for future generations to have access to their stories. And so with the William and Don Griffiths Vietnam War Oral History Archive, our intent then is not just to put students in a position to learn and to enhance their marketable skills, but also to work with faculty. Now, the project will provide faculty and staff in the College of Arts and Humanities the opportunity to do collaborative research and recover an important part of America's history. The project will also provide ASU students critical training to develop their marketable skills, so staff and faculty will work with the students to show them and to develop their skills on how to properly interview people, how to copy material, and provide that material for future generations to consult. And ultimately, the repository will be in the West Texas collection. A lot of it we're going to transfer to an online format so that if people can't actually physically make the trip to the West Texas collection, then they can certainly consult a lot of this information online. This is a wonderful gift that has been provided to us that will enhance the educational experience of our ASU students. But as I said, it will provide future researchers and archive visitors the means to learn about our Vietnam veterans. And from that perspective, there's a personal side to it that I want to share with everybody, and that is, as a young man growing up in West Texas, I had the opportunity to be around so many veterans. My father was in law enforcement, and I got to meet so many veterans. But, I never really understood their personal stories because they never talked about it. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I drove out to West Texas with some of my colleagues in the Department of History to interview veterans as part of a project that we had then, that I got to interview for the first time ever my coach at Alpine Junior High, Coach Polanco. And I had no idea that he was a sergeant in the United States Army and a recipient of the Silver Star. Or that during my days of working in Homeland Security that I worked alongside Roger Amos, who was a member of the 101st Airborne and a Vietnam veteran who grew up in Ohio and who joined the military and served in Vietnam. And those stories were so important to recover, and I felt as if I had been handed a gift from them that they would actually candidly speak with me. And I remember Roger Amos breaking down at one point, talking about his experiences, and I thought, this will be of a great benefit, not just to future researchers, but also to his family. And then finally I want to talk about one individual that I knew my entire life, that I knew since I was a young boy, and that's Mr. Bobby Ray Turner, who, born in 1950, joined the United States Army, served in Vietnam as an airborne ranger and as a LRP, and that was a long-range reconnaissance patrol. And growing up, he never talked about his experiences. Only on occasion would he drop tidbits of information, and his son and I are like brothers, and we've discussed so many times the fact that there was so much about his father that was unknown, but we did come to understand his pain and suffering and the years that he dealt with that. And he passed away a few years ago, and I just remember thinking that there was such an opportunity there that we lost a history of a true American hero that we will never know. And so in closing, I want to say that I thank the donors, the anonymous donors, and the people who have been a part of this project, because on so many different levels, whether it's an academic level or a personal level, I understand the need to recover this important history of our American heroes who served in Vietnam. And there's a photograph that I love so much in the Brewster County Courthouse where I grew up of World War I veterans who lined up in front of the courthouse in 1919 to take a photograph. And that type of memory will exist forever as people visit that courthouse. And I think that we need to do the same for Vietnam veterans, because they are truly our American heroes, and I thank them for their service. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Klingeman. And can I just say thank you for your service? You left yourself out, which just proves the point, right? That's just a great segue into this, this formal capturing of veterans' history, and then what we're going to have in just a moment live. So that's the part that I get to do. A few years ago, as I became the director of the Veterans Center, I just began to think of wanting to have a way where we could recognize living veterans, those who have contributed a lot to ASU, a lot to our community, and have just really made the veterans part of the R.A.M fam. And so we established what we call the R.A.M Veteran of the Year. And because the military operates in the acronym world, we made it an acronym, right? So R.A.M stands for Remembering Angelo's Military. And this year, I think most ASU alumni, students, and folks around the community, obviously has been mentioned here already this morning, know Coach Phil George very well. Whether it was from the 36 years here as a coach of men's basketball, but also, as we've seen the pictures, I think coached in a lot of other sports, becoming the athletic director, being at all the games since then, serving as faculty, and so many different things in and around our campus. Coach George is just an iconic figure who stands out, but I will tell you, as somebody who I like to pride myself, there's the wrong word, right? But anyway, I try to keep up with who the veterans are in our community and all. I had no idea that Coach George was a veteran until just a couple of years ago, and so that just proves the point about whether you're actually endowed with a grant to go talk to veterans or you just run across one on the street, maybe wearing a cap or something, get to know them and ask their story. So I want to get on though with Coach George and his story today. And it's almost like a Paul Harvey moment. If you know Coach George, you need to know the rest of the story, and that's the story of Lieutenant Colonel George, who as a teenager began an extraordinary military career as an Air Force pilot, a veteran of World War II that stretches all the way across to Vietnam. And I've not heard of that before. It must be a fairly rare and unique group. But here to tell the rest of that story in his own words, please help me welcome Phil George.
Thank you very much for that wonderful and questionable introduction. Not questionable, but just makes me feel kind of old. I better take this thing off. It's kind of hard to wear these things with hearing aids. But anyway, I want to thank the committee, the people who made this recognition possible. I'm humbled by it. I'm honored by it. I hope that I'll represent it as near the fashion as the previous recipients have. And I want to tell you that I'm not a hero. I was one of those guys that was extremely fortunate. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on Sunday morning, December the 7th, 1941, I was a 17-and-a-half-year high school student. I had the best of all worlds. Our team was winning, looked like we were going to go in the playoffs real far. I had a high school sweetheart We didn't have numbers on them then, but she was at least a 10 or a 12 to me. And those of y'all that know my wife don't think I'm being sacrilegious. I didn't meet Toddy until 5 years later. And she was by far the best thing that ever happened to me. We had a 71-year honeymoon. But anyway, I did not know where Pearl Harbor was. I didn't know what it meant. The next day, walking home from school, I saw men lined up around the Federal Building in downtown Austin waiting to volunteer to sign up. Then I went home, and when my dad came home, I asked him about it, and he tried to explain it as best he could. We didn't have all the means of communication we have today. Our primary sources were the radio and newspapers, but they were full of a lot of information. And in those days, to kind of give you a history of it, the Selective Service Department of the United States, normally referred to as the Draft Board, gave all the males a number when they turned 18. And then when you turned 18, they put your number in the lottery pot, and they drew it out by lottery as to when you'd be called up. And after you were called up, if you hadn't volunteered specifically, then they would allocate where they needed you for training, and they would test you and try to put you in a position that would help the war cause as best they could. Well, I had a buddy that played with, I ran around with in the neighborhood, and he comes by the house the latter part of July of 42, July 42, and I had just turned my 18th birthday. And he said, let's go join the Army Air Corps. And I said, really, what are we going to do? He said, let's join the pilot training program. I said, I don't think they'll take me. I'm only a high school graduate. And he said that they have such a need that the requirements are different now. And if you can pass the written and what they call psychomotor, all hand-eye coordination and logic and different things like that, and pass the physical, you can join the cadet program. And I said, wow, let's try it. And I had never flown. I never knew nothing about airplanes. And we thumbed it over to San Antonio because they didn't have a testing center in Austin at that time. And we went to the thing, went to the office where it was, and they told us what we'd have to do. We'd take a test on Monday morning, which was the next morning. And it was a written test, and I don't remember exactly how long, but I think it was a 2-hour time test. And it covered a whole host of things. And a lot of it was math, a lot of it was common sense, a lot of it was about government, a lot of it had a little bit of logic or interpretation to it. And I had no idea if I did good or bad, so they said, we want all of you guys to wait and show up in the morning, and we'll tell you if you passed it. If you passed it, you get to take the psychomotor test. Well, my buddy and I both fortunately passed it. And so we take this thing, and it was really funny. It was about checking reflexes and eye-hand coordination and everything. And I lucked out. I passed that. And so the next morning we go to Fort Sam Houston for the physical. And I had never been through a physical like that in my life. It was thorough, but it was complete. And it was really trying to find out what you were really like. And when I got through the end of it, you'd go in and you'd sit in a room with 4 officers sitting up on a panel in front of you, and they had you individually in there. And they had all your records, and they'd ask you a number of questions, and then they'd make the decision as to whether you passed. And the chairman of that board put the stamp on and said, I passed. And he said, you will go into the pilot training program. Now, you need to understand, in those days, the air manning documents were different on aircraft crews. They needed navigators and bombardiers, and they had some method of deciding whether you'd be a pilot, bombardier, or navigator, and I didn't want to be either one of those. And thank goodness I got to be a pilot. Well, that was August the 2nd, 1942, and I was sworn in. It was a great adventure. A lot of sadness, a lot of hard times, but a wonderful ending. And I was never a hero in all of this. I was a beneficiary of getting to fly a lot of good airplanes. And I never think we gave enough credit to the men and women who at home built all that stuff that we tore up or bombed up or messed up or fired off or whatever had happened to it. And I often wondered lately, since I'm in a nostalgic mood, what possessed young people without any knowledge of military at all to be thrown into a world war, where at the time we were obviously fighting for survival of America because of the heavy licks we took at Pearl Harbor and by the fact that we had joined the European war shortly after Pearl Harbor, so there was going to be battling on two fronts. And I got to thinking, and I think a lot of it had to do with our education, with our school system, with our churches, with our families. I think in the main, all of us young men had a true love and a loyalty for the United States. And we wanted to be part of it. Our being part of it was not a brilliant decision. It was probably based more on enthusiasm than knowledge. But pilot training was interesting, really interesting. And I bought into it. I loved it. From the first little exhibition ride that the instructor pilot gives you, I thought it was like having a free ticket to the circus, that I was going to get to do these things that he could do in the airplane. And it's probably not commonly known, but all of the instructors in primary schools in those days were civilians. They were not military. And the Czech pilots were military. So the instructors would teach us all of the maneuvers and things we needed to know, and then the military pilots would give us a check ride to see if we could do it right. Well, I had a lot of fun, and I learned a lot of discipline. And I shouldn't tell this story, but I'll tell it on myself. It's kind of crazy. I had an older brother. I had two older brothers, but the one just older than me was also in a pilot training program, and he was in my lower class. And he woke up mad every morning because I was his upperclassman. And so I would try to take advantage of that. So we were in the mess hall, and I knew by looking at the schedule, I was scheduled to fly solo that day, and the underclassmen always flew off the auxiliary. And so I told him, I said, "Are you on the flight schedule?" And he said, "I don't know." I said, "Well, I am, and I'm going to come over and put on an air show for y'all." And please remember, I was 18 and thought like about a 12-year-old. So I go over there and I do all kind of acrobatics and everything, and I was well-trained pilot. I must have had almost 40 hours. I mean, that's when you're the most dangerous. And dumb me, I forgot that they had a number on the tail of the aircraft. So when I go back and land, they're waiting on me. Well, they had a thing called tours, and that was a form of discipline or punishment. And I had to walk tours with a parachute strapped on like I was going to bail out, the circumference of the aerodrome for 2 hours that night. I was chapped until we signed the peace on September the 2nd. But anyway, I learned a lot. I never did stupid things like that again. And And when I graduated, I was fortunate enough to get into a group. It took a little while to do it. I was training what they were called combat cargo. It was a new idea about training the pilots and crews to go into the hot spots. And after about 6 weeks there, they took me for some reason and sent me down to Fort Benning, Georgia to the jump school. So we were training paratroopers in the morning, and in the afternoon we were doing the war games with the 101st and 82nd Airborne. And that was extremely interesting and very proficiently for me, because I got to fly almost all day, 5 days a week. And I loved that. And it gave me a leg up on my experiences in the future. Unfortunately, if you look at me, I'm not built like normal people. I've got real long legs, and my Adam's apple's close to my waist. And so I had trouble fitting in cockpits. And the planes that we were using and the planes that you saw up here on the pictures, those are a variety of different airplanes that I flew for different times. So I got an opportunity to fly a lot of good airplanes. So they decided that they need to move me out, because the yoke on the C-47 comes up here and comes across, and I'm too long-legged. The knee would have to be either on the fore side of the yoke or on the back side, and so I'm either in a dive or a climb unless I sit sideways. Well, leadership decided I needed to be in a bigger aircraft, so they sent me to C-46s. And that was a better airplane for what we were trying to do, the mission, because it could get higher altitude, and also because the yoke was in the middle and had a bigger capacity too. Well, when I went through OTU, that's Overseas Training Unit, that was about 6 weeks. They designated me as the aircraft commander and gave me a crew of 4. Had a co-pilot, and I had a radio operator. He was 18, I was 20, co-pilot was 20, and then we had an old man for the engineer. He was 26. And he was probably the best member of the crew, because he came off a farm and he knew how to fix everything. And so he put up with the kids that were up in the cockpit. But anyway, they sent me to Savannah, Georgia to pick up a new airplane. Okay, when I got the airplane, the command post said, okay, we want you to take it to R.A.M. Now, R.A.M. is not a real big nation. It's a small country on the western slope of the Himalayas between China and India. It's north of Burma, in a big valley, and we were going to be stationed with a tactical unit at Dinjan, R.A.M. So I asked them, how in the world am I supposed to get the plane from here to there? And they said, it won't go across the Atlantic on the southern route. You got to go the northern route so you can island hop. And so we did. We went to Labrador and Greenland and Iceland and Scotland and England and France and Tripoli and Cairo and Abadan, Iran, and Karachi and Agra, and then finally got to Calcutta. That's a long way to get to the Far East. But I thought back, why in the world did they let a 20-year-old do something like that? And we were by ourselves. But I guess we were cocky enough, we didn't even think about it. We thought it was a great adventure, and it was. I wound up being a hump pilot, which means that we were flying cargo and ammunition and gasoline and personnel and whatever the needs were from India and Dinjan over to Kunming, China, primarily, over the Himalaya Mountains. And that was quite an exhibition. I mean, it was quite an adventure because the weather's so bad. But we learned a lot. We lost a lot of men. We lost a lot of crews, but we learned a lot, and it really helped because at that time they did not have the Burma Road to help them. Well, then our American forces had kicked a bunch out of Chikyang, which was a Japanese base in western China that the Americans had run them out, and so they took it over, and our squadron moved in there. And then we could do the tactical things that we were trained for. We went over and became hump pilots. And that was a growing up time for me. I think I learned more about mankind and human nature and responsibility and being part of a team and understanding that it's not easy for a lot of people. We're not all created the same. Some people have more difficult times than others. And it was a very emotional but educational time for me. And then about 3-4 months before the end of the war, they sent me TDY, that stands for temporary duty, to an organization called OSS. OSS stands for the Office of Strategic Services. It's kind of the forerunner of the CIA. And they said, you're going to be our mission pilot. And says, you're not one of our operatives. We won't tell you what we're doing, and don't ever ask us. And I heard that loud and clear. But you can imagine in your heart the unique missions we had on that group up in Manchuria and down into Formosa and all over Burma and China. And so it was a real growing up period for me. But don't get wrong, I was never a hero. I was one of those lucky guys that got to do something that I mainly enjoyed doing. I loved flying. And so it was a great experience for me. And then they dropped the atomic bombs, and we didn't hear about it at Chikyang probably for 2 or 3 days and didn't know what it meant. And a few days after the one on Nagasaki, the Japanese verbally surrendered. And we got word of that. And that was really, I can't tell you the jubilation that we had in our squadron over that. Just picture a bunch of young men that had been living a totally unique life, nothing similar to what they had lived the previous 3 or 4 years, to find out that it's all over and they're going to get to go home. It was a feeling that I'll always remember. And they brought us home on a troop ship. And it must have been hung in low gear. It took us 29 days to get across the Pacific. Now that wasn't the bad part because we're going home. The bad part is that we had some bad incidents on board. One of the pilots from our squadron, for some unknown reason, committed suicide. And that just kind of deflated all of ours about the rest of that trip. And then a young airman died with a very unusual thing, an abscessed tooth that settled in his lung and killed him. And they had a burial at sea. And I will never remember. I think I could quote that whole service now. It's a very emotional, meaningful thing. And when we finally got to Fort Camp Stoneman in California, close to San Francisco, and they disembarked us, and I think as a man, when we stepped on American soil, we said either to ourselves or to our buddies, thank God, it's all over with. And we'll never be in a world of total conflict like that again. That's how naive we were when we look at the world today. But the Air Force was good for me. They let me fly airplanes for 26 years, both active and in the reserve. And I'm so honored that I got to be a part of it. That was a very small part. But I had some wonderful experiences, met some great people. I learned a lot about life. It was amazing to me that I was born in a country that has that kind of people in it. And that's still very meaningful to me. I was recalled for Vietnam, and that was a total surprise because it's the middle of the season here. And they called me on a Thursday night to report the next day. And I thought that was a little abrupt. But excuse me, General, for saying things like that. But anyway, the colonel was a good friend of mine, and he allowed me to wait until midnight of the next day to get there. Well, on the next Monday, the command post told me that I was on my way to Vietnam the next morning. And that's okay. That's okay. If you sign up to be part of the program, be a part of it. Don't be a bellyachre. Don't be a backslider. Don't be a moaner. And I can still remember what my wife said, because it happened that I was coaching a game on that Monday night here at the Coliseum through the gift of the colonel. He said, I'll call you when you're shipping out. And they called me during the game, and of course we had to interrupt the game, and in my brilliance, that's a mistake. I called timeout, and I told the captains, keep calling timeouts till I get back. And I ran back, and the command post says, Phil, you need to get down here. You're leaving in the morning at 6:30. And I said, okay, I'm on my way. So when the game was over, and I came out of the locker room after visiting with the team and telling them things, my wife and my daughter, who's here today, and I want to thank y'all for honoring the Griffiths. Our family goes way back on a tie to them. My daughter and Don's and Bill's younger sister, Sally, were born on the same day. And as luck would have it, they got them mixed up in the hospital and took the wrong babies to the wrong mothers. And it was an omen. They've been tied at the hip their entire life up until Sally passed away with pancreatic cancer. Thank y'all for doing that for the Griffiths. They're great people, great people. So my wife says, what was that you left the bench? And I said, honey, I've got to leave here. I'm going straight from here to San Antonio to get the crew, and we're leaving. She said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Vietnam. This is exactly what she said. Don't you worry about the kids or me. I'll take care of everything. You just be safe. How many men get that kind of a send-off? So you see, I've always considered myself one of the luckiest people in the world. And I mean that sincerely. It's not a figure of speech. I would hope that everybody would have the type of experiences I've had. But in closing, I want to thank you for honoring me. I'm humbled by it. It means a lot to me. The military always meant a lot to me. The men who were the heroes were primarily the men who fought the ground wars and fought the wars at sea, and either did not get to come home or came home all beat up or injured or crippled or what have you. And I came home still able to have a full life and a wonderful life. And so I'm humbled and honored, and I'm appreciative of that. Thank y'all much, and I appreciate it.
Mic check. There we go. If that doesn't just prove our point about, and please be seated. If you see a veteran, give them a head nod, give them acknowledge their presence and ask them where they served and when they served, and just hope that they start talking. And then turn on your phones and get it recorded. That's just so precious. And so how that really ties together our whole event today, I think, in capturing these histories. So thanks again, Phil. And now I can't think of any better way to conclude today's celebration than by introducing the highest ranking veteran on our campus. And I mean that in terms of military service, but also President Hawkins for some closing remarks.
Well, Susan, thank you for putting on this entire event. Thank you to you and your staff. But we also want to recognize what has been done through the San Angelo Area Foundation. Matt Lewis, thank you for participating and bringing forth the anonymous donors and what it is that they're going to be able to contribute not only to Angelo State but to history as a result of them giving in that gift. I stand before you this morning, afternoon, in a uniform for a variety of reasons. Two of those are to salute Don Griffiths as well as Lieutenant Colonel Phil George. We appreciate what you have done, your commitment to the country, but more importantly, your contribution to San Angelo as well as to Angelo State is absolutely tremendous. And in many regards, many people don't realize the impact that you have made on this institution as well as this city. So we thank you as well, but we also extend that thanks to the family. Being a military brat myself, I know what that means to have your father sent off somewhere. My father spent 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, and I appreciate what your wife told you, because my mother told my father the very same thing. She was going to take care of the household, but we wanted him to come back safely. And it brought tears to my eyes to hear you say that, because I thought my mother was the only one who said it. But it is just typical of military spouses and families, the impact that you also make on the institution as well as the United States. We have upwards of around 13% of our students here at Angelo State who from one way or another are affected by the military, being a spouse, a dependent, or in fact in the military themselves, or have been in the military. And that number is extremely high, considering the fact that less than 1% of our population participates in the military nowadays, shape, form, or fashion, as a result of it not being selective service, but being all volunteer. But that should also let you know how superior the military is in bringing in volunteers for what it is that they do, and that is a commitment to serve the United States of America, the Constitution of the United States of America. I also wear this uniform for another reason, and that is when I came here on the campus and was going through ROTC, we were not allowed to wear the uniform coming onto the campus. So we had to bring it, put it on, participate in our ROTC functions, take it off, and go home. That lasted for one of the years that I was in, and then the last 2 years that I was in, we were able to then wear it coming into the campus. But I remember those days because it was right at the end of the Vietnam War, and for all of our veterans who served during that time frame, I salute you, I admire you, and I appreciate the sacrifice that you made. So, Coach, I know you said you're not a hero, and I appreciate what you're saying when you've done that. I've been through 13 roll calls of individuals who have died in combat, and there is nothing like hearing taps and what goes on as a result of that. But you are a hero to me for what it is that you have done. You're a role model of mine for what it is that you did while I was here as a student athlete, and you will continue to be that role model for the contributions that you make. That not only goes for Coach George, Lieutenant Colonel George, but that also goes to Don Griffiths. And so we pass that on to him too. One of the things that we have a tradition for doing in the military is giving out what you call a challenge or commander's coin. And I have one for each of you that I would like to give you before we depart. And one last thing, if you were to come into my office, you're going to see some memorabilia in the windows and all, and one of them happens to be a sculpture of what happened in Pearl Harbor on Pearl Harbor Day that it was attacked, and that was the building was left intact with all the mortar holes that came out of it. And so I have one of those in my window to remind me of that time. And then in another window I have a piece of shrapnel from an exploded missile that exploded about 100 yards away from me. And if there's anything that Coach George just said that is very, very true, war is a very ugly thing. And if you can leave those memories back there, the better off you are for it. But to be able to capture the memories from our Vietnam vets is just, it's invaluable. So we look forward to what Dr. Klingeman and his folks are going to do, the students that are going to have an impact and an ability to be able to capture that history and then pass it on to faculty as well as future students here is invaluable. We thank you for that, and we thank you again to the San Angelo Area Foundation for your contributions and your service, and we appreciate it. We usually do have a closing where we would retire the colors, but because of the situation we're in right now, we're not going to do that. But we thank everybody that is here, all that are listening, whether it's through live stream or going to be listening to this as a recording. We thank you for being a part of this. We in the military are the greatest military it is because of the people that are in the military and the families that support it. A lot of those individuals are here, right here in Tom Green County and San Angelo, Texas, and more in particular, Angelo State University. We thank you for your participation. We thank you for coming, and we look forward to hearing those oral presentations and the richness that's going to come as a result of that. Thank you once again. God bless. Thank you.